Thank you very much. I'm so delighted to be here. I'm the only Julio Friedmann you'll ever meet. Promise you that. There's only one other. He lives in Chile. Sometimes I'm introduced by people as Obama's coal guy, so I'm loved by everyone, as you can imagine. But I'm here to talk to you about a very important technology, actually, what I call a sine qua non technology, one that not a lot of people know about. So stick with me. I speak quickly, but there's a lot to cover. Before I say something, though, I want to say something. We've never used less of any kind of energy. We've never used less of any kind of energy. We use more coal now than we used to. We use more wood now than we used to. And that's the framework of where we're looking. So if from here forward, I think I got this right, all clean energy forward had no carbon emissions, we would still be emitting 36 billion tons of carbon dioxide a year. Most people don't have a feeling for what that is. You don't go to the store and buy 1 billion tons of carrots. So 1 billion tons is twice the weight of all of human beings. So every year, we emit 72 times the weight of humanity into the atmosphere in the form of carbon dioxide. It's a lot. And if from here forward we have zero emissions, for new energy supplies, we still have that 36 billion tons. So there's work to be done, and we are also having to execute that work in a time of fossil energy abundance. There's a lot of good news that comes with a time of fossil energy abundance. There's wealth creation, low commodity prices actually give economic stimulus, all this other stuff, but it also means that we have low cost, it means increased deployment and lock-in of those technologies. So we're putting out more gas. We heard about that many times yesterday. We are the #1 producer of oil in the world. Oil production's heading flat out everywhere. Prices are at all-time lows. And coal consumption is going up worldwide. That's the backdrop, okay? So there's work to do. So what is actually possible? In this exact context, I'm going to give you some information from some climate scientists and from some economists who have some thoughts about this. This is from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. This is not a group prone to histrionics. They require consensus of 190 nations to do their work. This was their report in 2014. The actual thing they said is, if we don't have CCS, we probably can't hit a stabilization target. If we don't have it, our chance of hitting a 450 parts per million stabilization target, which is a 2-degree target, is less than 50%. Compared to nuclear, or solar or wind, or bioenergy, it's really important. Similarly, they said, if you don't have that technology and you do make your target, it'll cost you 138% more to get there. That's a lot of money. So basically, instead of 1% of global GDP, you're talking about 2% of global GDP. Specifically, the quote I've got here is from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. They say CCUS, carbon capture, utilization, and storage, may be the most important technology for the least cost decarbonization. I'll unpack that for you in a minute and explain why. Energy economists basically say something similar. They say the only way that we get there is with everything. All of the above, you may have heard that before, the all of the above energy strategy. The president says this, the Secretary of Energy says this, and this is what all of the above looks like. It means you need a whole bunch of energy efficiency to get there, or else you don't. It means you need a whole bunch of renewables to get there, or else you don't. Good news is we have David Danielson working those issues. But we actually need all of it. Switching from coal to gas gets you about 12% of what you need to do. But if you don't have carbon capture and storage, you miss about 1/7 of it. You don't actually hit your target. It's required, and the reason why is because it's the lowest cost option in some markets, and some things are really hard to decarbonize any other way. So what are we talking about? Most people know what a solar panel looks like or a windmill. They know what a nuclear plant looks like. They don't know what this is. So let me take a minute. Carbon capture and storage is carbon capture and carbon storage. Very straightforward. The capture basically means you go to a big point source, a refinery, a power plant, could be an ethanol plant, whatever. You go to a big source, you separate out the CO2 to high concentration. That takes some money and some work. But we know how to do this. We've actually been doing that since 1938 pretty well. The second part is the storage. You put it underground. There's other things you can do. Some of the things you can do, for example, enhanced oil recovery, get you some oil production, which is a nice thing for revenue and for security and other things. But fundamentally, you're putting it underground. We know this works because we've been doing it since 1972 at about 60 million tons a year worldwide. And just for the purpose of storing it, we've been doing it for 20 years. Today's the 20th anniversary of the Sleipner project. In the North Sea, they've just been separating and injecting CO2 underground for about 20 years. And we know we have a lot of room to put it. We have many hundred years of storage volume. Being able to put CO2 underground ends up being a natural resource like anything else. If you've got that resource, it has value. Japan does not have that resource. The United States does. Great. That means we have a decarbonization option that they don't. The only other thing I want to say on this picture here, I want to draw your attention to that 2-kilometer scale bar. We're not talking about digging trenches and pouring dry ice in people's backyards. We are injecting stuff deep underground using well-understood oil and gas technology. If you've ever tried to move 2 kilometers of the Earth's crust, it's very hard. And so we actually know the Earth is pretty well configured to store these large volumes of CO2 indefinitely. So all of the above means all of the above. This is part of the president's portfolio. In fact, if you go to the Climate Action Plan, it is literally in the middle of the document. And it's part of what we need to do. And the administration's been taking a pretty broad perspective on all the things we can do. So, for example, we put about $4.5 billion of stimulus money forward to say, let's do some stuff. We spent about $2.5 billion of that. The Loan Program Office, which is a completely different authority, said, we'll give loans up to $8 billion. Great tenor, great terms. If you've got a low-carbon fossil energy project, we want to know. The president's recently proposed in the 2016 budget a whole bunch of tax credits. We heard about investment tax credits and production tax credits for renewables. He said, let's put something forward that's similar to that for carbon capture and storage, because we want to see deployment, because deployment will drive down the costs. We also have our R&D program. That's what I do. I develop the technologies and try to get them to the field. You'll see a bit of that in a second. Our annual budget's about $630 million. For scale, that is about the same as the vehicle budget. It's about the same as the renewable budget. It's about the same as the efficiency budget. It's about the same as the nuclear budget. So we feel loved. It is all of the above. And we actually need to put all of these things forward if we're going to succeed. And so we take this mission very, very seriously. Technology status is basically ready to go. We've done multiple projects worldwide. We know that there is plenty of room to reduce costs through technology development and deployment, but there's just a lot of work to be done. If you get nothing else out of today's talk, I want you to get this. This is not about cost. This is about finance. Clean energy deployment is about finance. How do you get the money together to deploy it? And that's the main issue with CCS. I'll come back to that at the end, but keep that in mind as you think this whole thing through. So let me show you what I'm talking about. This was the birth of a new species. This power plant turned on about 1.5 years ago in Canada. It's capturing about 1.5 million, a little over 1 million tons of CO2 a year. It's actually still in the ramping up phase, but the steam coming out the top of that device is the one that does the capture. It's working. Works just fine. This was a retrofit of an old coal-fired power plant. The emissions that were going up in the air are not going up in the air anymore. Now they're going underground. They're being monitored and stored. This is from a refinery in Texas. This has been operating for almost 3 years, and we're at about 3 million tons. Here, what we're doing is we're making hydrogen from methane. When you do that, you have a byproduct stream of CO2 that's very pure. You compress it, put it in a pipeline, send it off for enhanced oil recovery. This makes very near zero carbon hydrogen, 90% decarbonized hydrogen for $1.80 a million gigajoule. $1.80 gigajoule for low carbon hydrogen is a great price. And we've been doing this for years. Project just opened up in Canada does the same thing. This is the big brother of the Boundary Dam project, Petronova. David Crane, who you heard from yesterday, was the visionary who said, we're going to put some money into this and make it work. This is on target and on schedule. This is going to turn on in the summer and be fully operational by the end of the year. 1.4 million tons of carbon dioxide a year. The all-in costs for this are about $100 a ton. Both Boundary Dam and these guys say, we can do this next time for 30% less. So when n equals 1, it's $100 a ton. When n equals 2, it's 70 to 80. When n equals 4, it's about 60. So you can get very rapid cost reductions through the first round of deployment. I would be remiss in my obligations if I didn't mention this one. This is the Kemper project in Mississippi. Many of you have heard of this. This is a project that is very far over budget and late to open. But it's also a very new technology. I wanted to give you a picture here to give you a sense of what the scale of this enterprise is. This is not something that you do in small batches. You don't put up 1 or 2 panels of this. These are all capital-intensive projects, which actually makes the financing more important. Because you can't do like $20 million of CCS. These are big, lumpy fundings, but that's what's required to get the work done. This project is not only going to create 3,000 jobs locally, it's also going to be a zero-water discharge plant. In fact, this plant is going to be net water positive because they have to dry the coal before they can use it, and they have a byproduct freshwater stream that comes from this plant. Last thing on this slide, you'll see a little black patch up there. That's the coal that they're actually mining. That is lignite on site. That costs $10 a ton for fuel. That is a very, very cheap price for fuel. It's just hard to beat that. Half the coal in the world is like that. It's abundant in China, it's abundant in India, it's abundant in many places. So, having a technology that can decarbonize, that's actually worth doing. In addition to that, there's a lot of low-cost stuff we can do in the industrial sector. This is a map of where we're going to store CO2 in North America. And the circles there are different kinds of things. And the yellow ones are all ethanol plants. So we're making biofuels there. We can cut the carbon footprint of those biofuels by 50%. In fact, we got a project doing that in Decatur, Illinois. Some of those are fertilizer plants, some of those are refineries. In those places, they have a pure stream of CO2 today, so there's no capture required. You can just compress it and store it, like that project I mentioned in Texas, the Port Arthur project. We think we can do that at about 15 to 20 bucks a ton. That is super low cost abatement. We think by 2025, we could get like over 40 million tons a year of that. To give you a sense of what that is, 40 million tons, well, let's pull it back. So far, the projects I've done in the Department of Energy have put away 10 million tons of carbon dioxide. For scale, 10 million tons is the weight of all the people in California, Texas, and half of New Jersey. You choose the half. 40 million tons is the weight of a big fraction of the United States population. These are big numbers. So you get a lot of abatement, but it takes a lot of money to get a lot of abatement. And it takes a lot of money not on a per ton basis, but the all-in basis. Any one of these projects, you're looking at $200 million, $500 million, $1 billion to get the thing off the ground. Still, we've done that. These are projects going up around the world. If you'd asked me 3 years ago, will the Middle East be spending money to do this, I would have said no, and I would have been wrong. There's 2 big projects in the Middle East, Uthmaniyah in Saudi Arabia, which is decarbonizing a refinery, about 1 million tons a year. That's operational today. ESI, Emirates Steel, I was just at that facility. They're done construction. They're going to be turning that on this summer. That's going to decarbonize their steel production. They're going to have low-carbon steel that can enter into the market and hopefully sell at a premium. All these other ones are industrial projects. The big one here is Gorgon. That's coming online in a year. 5 million tons a year from one facility. That's a lot of abatement. That's like pulling 1 million cars off the road. The Quest project in Canada, these guys are taking 1 million tons of CO2 and putting it underground today, but they supersized their pipeline to do 3 times that amount. So if the heavy oil upgraders want to throw down and decarbonize their facilities at the rate of another couple of million tons, Shell is happy to help them. But these are going on. These projects are where the innovation is happening. When somebody puts $500 million on the table, it focuses the mind. You get a lot of innovation that comes out of that as a consequence. Not just in the technology, but in the engineering, in the business models, in the financing, and all these things. So we really need projects to go forward. So what do we know? This is from the World Resource Institute. Again, not exactly a sort of histrionic or extreme group from any perspective. And these are actual costs. BNAF up there is Bloomberg New Energy Finance. Again, pretty reputable source, Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. These are the range of costs for a whole bunch of things. Here we got a couple of things I want to draw your attention to. Coal, and coal with CCS over there. Natural gas with CCS. It's not about coal, it's about emissions. You need to decarbonize the gas production as well. Nuclear that's on there is the cost today when you expand a plant. The circle there is cost for some of the more advanced technologies to give you a sense of what the range is. Wind, I put another circle up there. The winds there are onshore wind. Offshore wind is about where that other circle is. But again, there's a range. So today, the costs of CCS are between onshore and offshore wind. They're between existing nuclear and new nuclear. They're comparable with some solar in some markets. It's the mix. And if you look at that range for all these other technologies, one of the things this means is that in some market, onshore wind's going to win. In some market, solar's going to win. In some markets, CCS is going to win. That's why you need it, because those are the markets that are hard to scrub. Those are the ones with poor renewable resources, with a lot of heavy industry, and decarbonizing those provinces or territories without this technology ends up being very, very hard. This is actually even true in a world in which we put a lot of efficiency in place. These are two scenarios the Department of Energy ran, one of which is power generation with a mixed scenario, and the other one is with lots of efficiency. You still need all of the above. Otherwise, you don't get there. And a big chunk of that ends up being natural gas and coal with carbon capture and storage. So let's talk about the financing. I said the financing is the important thing. Let's talk about it. Cost recovery is the main issue. And so the administration has put a handful of proposals out there. The ones at the top already exist. Those are tax credits for existing facilities. 48A, 48B, and 45Q. I'm not going to get into this, but the bottom line is these tax credits are flawed in the way they're structured, so not a lot of groups can have access to them. So there was a new proposal this year by the president, investment tax credits and what are called sequestration tax credits, an STC, that is like a production tax credit, to get a couple of plants up. And the idea was to fix some of the problems with those other tax credits. The ITC is 30% of capital investment. The STC is $10 a ton if you're putting it in an oil field, $50 a ton if you're putting it into one of these deep saline formations. That is enough money to close the financing gap. You can make your money back if you know that money's coming in. Also, the Clean Power Plan talks about this. They talk about the fact that they call it best systems of emission reduction, which means we know enough to do something, and also it's an option for compliance for states. If you've got a steep target, you've got a lot of coal generation, you can choose to do CCS as part of your compliance option. There's a bunch of draft legislation in here. I'm not going to get into it, but what we like is that Congress is thinking about this. That's good. We hope they do something about it too, but they're thinking about this actually in a very sensible kind of way. There's other policies out there that you can do it, though. There aren't just tax credits. Clean energy portfolio instead of a renewable energy portfolio. That would give you cost recovery with a Public Utilities Commission. Feed-in tariffs in Europe, if they applied to CCS, we get deployment there too. The creation of CO2 utilities to organize and manage the risks and the cost. Tax-exempt debt financing, something Dan Reicher, earlier speaker, has worked very hard on. There's many mechanisms to get here. I don't recommend policy, but we do need to get the financing in place. It's just an important thing to do. There's a lot going on in the states. I don't want to give you the idea that there ain't, but again, we just need to activate to make real progress. Two closing thoughts. One of them is, one of the things we know is we're probably not going to hit a 400 trajectory. We're probably not going to hit a 450 trajectory. We won't hit a 350 trajectory. We know that, unless we actually have negative emissions technologies. CCS ends up being important as a negative emissions technology. You can take bioenergy, the trees take the CO2 out of the air, you burn the trees and put the CO2 underground. It works. Number of demonstrations around the world equals 0. We should probably get on with that. The other thing is many countries around the world care about this. This is Mission Innovation announced at Paris. You might notice the tall distinguished gentleman in the middle. These are the countries that have actually said they care about CCS and might be part of their commitment under Mission Innovation. A number of those countries have mentioned it as part of their INDCs. And so we actually see real truck around the world to get this thing going. But the technology leads and informs the policy. The policy, though, has got to be about the financing to get it going. With that, I'm grateful for your time and attention. and watch this space. Interesting things are happening.